Okay, I think that moment has arrived. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to get us started. My name is Heather Corcoran, and I am the Interim Dean of University College at Washington University. For more than 100 years, University College has been committed to bringing high-quality academic programs to students who are looking to continue their education in the St. Louis region. We have more than 40 programs of study, including individual courses, certificates, and full degrees to help you advance your career, explore new fields, and grow personally and professionally. Our open enrollment policy allows you to take courses on a non-degree basis, meaning you can take a single course if you want to. We are currently working on aligning University College even more closely to St. Louis work training and development. We'll be rolling out some new programs in coming months, so please stay tuned if you are interested. Today's event was designed by a team of my colleagues at University College, including John Hinderleiter, Elisa Wang, Pat Matthews, Karen Novak, and Vanessa Cooksey, who is here on the panel with us today. We want you to leave this webinar feeling like it was a great use of your time, so please plan to participate. After each of our panelists give a brief introductory remarks, we will open the floor for your questions and comments, which you can submit in the Q&A. And it is now my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Melissa Thompson. Melissa is a marketing expert in business and brand development. She recently returned to St. Louis after spending more than 10 years developing her career in Chicago and Washington, D.C. In her role with the St. Louis Business Journal, she serves as Director of Advertising, where she works with a variety of businesses who are trying to build brand awareness in order to grow. Melissa has extensive experience executing successful national promotional campaigns, web-based marketing plans, and sales strategies. She often speaks publicly on marketing and sales. She also has a strong background in training and development and has certification as a facilitation trainer and media spokesperson. The perfect person to lead us through this conversation today. Thank you so much, Melissa, for joining us, and it is our honor to have you here, and I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you so much, Heather, and thank you for inviting me to be a part of this just very important conversation. 2020 is a year that we are not going to forget anytime soon. And as we manage through a pandemic, social unrest, there is so much uncertainty still. And we're making unprecedented decisions during this time frame. Today, you're going to hear from our 4 renowned panelists. They will give you some insight into ways they are managing through these times of disruption. They will cover the importance of self-care, structuring a high-performance culture, competencies for leaders of tomorrow, and what does life look like post-COVID? We all want to know what that is, right? We have a moderator in the Q&A section. If you guys scroll your mouse down on the bottom of the screen, you'll see there's Q&A and chat. On the right side, if you hit chat, you'll see that running through, and we have several panelists that have already talked on there and said that they were open to conversation. If you would like to send out a question that we will address at the end of the conversation that Heather talked about, please put that question in the Q&A section. We would also love for you guys to spread the word about this conversation on your social media platforms. Today we have a hashtag that you can use for that. It's hashtag HR not as usual. Hashtag HR not as usual. Thank you guys so much. So I'd now like to introduce the panelists. Reggie Farrar, Director of Human Resources at Memorial Hospital. Reggie is a native of St. Louis and joined Memorial Hospital in early 2019. With more than 33 years of human resource experience, he has worked with many top companies like Southwest Airlines, Express Scripts, BJC, US Bank, and more. Thank you for being here today, Reggie.
Thank you, Melissa.
Jennifer Fickler, Director of Human Resources Management Program at Washington University. As an organizational psychologist by profession, Jennifer has designed, implemented, and led best-in-class leadership, coaching, change management, and more. She is also Senior Vice President within Global Coaching Practice at the Lee Hecht Harrison and leads thousands of coaching facilitation associates. Thank you for being here, Jennifer. Rhonda Gray, Business Performance Advisor at Insperity. Prior to joining Insperity, Rhonda was an executive search consultant with Collaborative Strategies. She was also the former executive director of Almost Home, a nonprofit. She has worked with United Way and St. Louis Public Schools in various consulting roles. Glad to have you here today, Rhonda.
Thank you.
And Andrew Metcalf, employment lawyer for Ogletree Deacons, an international law firm that focuses on workplace legal issues. He represents businesses and public organizations in all aspects of employment law, including both litigation and human resource counseling. He's a frequent speaker, corporate trainer, and board member of SHRM of Greater St. Louis. Great to have you here, Andrew.
Thanks, Melissa.
Of course. So we have a wonderful group of panelists today, so let's get started. You know, today I want to be intentional about taking self-care and putting it first. We don't really get to the luxury of doing that. So many of our panelists do think that this is key for HR leaders to be able to be in the mind space to help others during this time. Reggie, what advice do you have for HR professionals on taking care of themselves?
Thank you, Melissa. You know, first and foremost, I'd say we're in a different time, not just because of COVID or 2020, but even prior to those things, because gone are the days of leaving home at home and work at work. Things have begun to meld into both areas. So there are a couple of things that I try to do personally for myself that help me better manage myself and my work. First and foremost, you really have to think about the situations that you're in and be cognizant of the things that impact those decisions. Gone are the days that things are in black and white. Most often we hear, it depends. And it really does. Everything is situational. But as we think about how we address our own self-care, we have to think about the things that we often offer up to our leaders in terms of helping them through things. So one of the things I practice is really trying to put that mirror up and have that same conversation with myself that I have with leaders. The other thing I think is critical is really health and wellness. And we had a great session, SMPHR had a great session a couple of weeks ago with a healthcare health coach that really talked about how to just keep yourself loose and limber and keep yourself motivated within the workplace. So doing things like stretching. You know, this day and time, we're spending tons and tons of time on Zoom calls and on Teams meetings. And so how do you keep yourself motivated, keep the blood flowing, get up, stretch, do things like that? The other piece that I think is critical is for us to understand, you know, what happens and how we deal with those things really is a function of how we think through them. I really believe life is 10% what happens to you and 90% how you respond to it. Mm-hmm. The other thing that I think is critical is making sure that you are aligned with your company. I can speak for myself where I really had a situation where the company's values didn't align with mine. And I am happy to say that is not the case now. I'm very much aligned with my company. But when you're faced with those kinds of things, you really have to examine the misalignment and determine for you, is this something that you can live with? Is this something you can't live with? And really speak to how you can still be an advocate for a company whose values are misaligned from yours. Ultimately, it comes down to you have to make a decision. You have to determine if those values are so misaligned that it affects you, because that's one of the key stressors in everybody's situation where they have a company that doesn't align to the values that they have, and how you manage that throughout your employment with that company. So I just think it's critical to think inwardly, whether it be about the day-to-day operations or more broadly in terms of the values of the organization. Thank you,
Reggie. Can you talked about your value system. Can you elaborate a little bit more on why that's important and how you are able to manage conflicting stands in the environment? Why is that value system so important?
Well, it's your true north. It's your compass. It's your value of how you operate. And so when you find yourself in a conflicting situation, one, I think you have to be honest and transparent with yourself to assess whether those values are really misaligned or they're just viewing them differently. Yeah. Ultimately, when you come to a place where those values are misaligned And I can think of a situation now where with what happened around the social injustice and how our CEO spoke very succinctly and matter-of-factly about his stand on it and wanting to help make a change. That felt good to me. That's something that I can truly, truly get behind. I've been in other companies where not only did the CEO not come out that strongly, but the company didn't make a stand at all. And those are troubling times for me. That's really the basis for where you have to make that decision about, is that company the right company for you?
Great point, Reggie. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Rhonda, as the workplace is continually transforming, and especially right now, what is the role of an HR leader in structuring a high performance culture with accountability?
Oh, well, first of all, let me say this. I think we can all agree that these are not typical times. And HR already has a challenging role. And first of all, shout out and thank you to all the folks who in HR who really have also been on the front lines. We talk about essential workers and HR and trying to navigate their businesses and organizations through this COVID crisis and all of the other situations we are faced with. HR's role has evolved and is more critical now than it's ever been. But in response to your question, I would say that first and foremost, HR leaders really can work with other leaders in our organization, senior team leadership, business owners. And first of all, clarify what the goals of the organization are. Clarify those strategic goals and what the organization is now working towards, particularly if it's had to pivot during this time. And then HR can take the lead in designing a culture that produces the results to support those goals. And I think that it's important to note that we talk a lot about culture. HR is probably, one of the words that's thrown around the most. And oftentimes what we don't realize is, every organization and business had a culture before COVID. You'll have a culture afterwards. And in many cases, it's created by default. There's no intentionality behind it. And so I think HR, folks in HR have really the great privilege of being able to design that culture intentionally, to make sure that everyone in the organization is clear about what it is the organization is trying to achieve. And Reggie mentioned the word alignment, and I think alignment is so critical because you want to make sure that everything that's being communicated and what's being done on the front lines is rolling up to achieve the business goals. I think HR literally has to spearhead that. They're close to the people. They're oftentimes communicating to, whether it's to the workers and to management and to leadership. So I would say HR take the lead and hold the flag in terms of designing a culture intentionally to support your business goals, whatever those are.
And Rhonda, just quickly, can you kind of touch on, how to be intentional with your strategic plans with inclusion of diversity and inclusion in your culture? How do you create actions and measurement around that quickly?
Oh man, this is something I've been talking to a lot of business owners about, and I actually am doing some work around this with my former employee with Collaborative Strategies. Diversity and inclusion is one of those things, and until recently, I think everybody was saying, yeah, they might have a D&I leader, they might say we're working on it, but I don't know if it was really defined, as you mentioned, in terms of measurement and metrics. And I remember, I think it was Penny Pennington, who's CEO of Edward Jones, that said, diversity is something you can count, inclusion is something you can feel, but it doesn't count unless you can feel it. And so with diversity, you have both sort of the hard metrics and then the soft side of diversity. I would say specifically from a strategic standpoint, you have to, first of all, make a commitment to really embedding it in the organization, in its culture, as evidenced by its values, as Reggie just mentioned. An example would be like in the NFL, they have the Rooney Rule. And so that requires the league's teams to interview minorities and include them on the final slate for anybody applying for like the senior operations and coaching positions. Well, that's a policy. Those are things that can be included in your strategic goals and objectives. So I think one of the things people in HR can do is, once again, work with their teams. The first step would be envision what your organization would look like if it was diverse and inclusive. What would people be doing, thinking, saying, and more importantly, how would that be impacting the bottom line and the financial performance of the organization? Once you've sort of envisioned what that feels like, and it can't just be about having numbers and checking boxes, then you work backwards to start designing a culture that supports that.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. It's not a culture of yours. You're just checking boxes.
No, no, no.
That's great. So I just want to take this moment just to remind everyone to please make sure that you are putting any of your questions that you have into the Q&A section. We're going to hear from 2 more panelists, and then we're going to take questions from the attendees. So Jennifer, what does a leader of tomorrow look like as far as competencies?
Yeah, it's a great question. As we are embarking around unprecedented times for our leaders, a lot of them, have been looked upon as being the experts, right? They're the people we go to for the answers. And we are experiencing through organizations that leaders don't have the answers. These are times that people have never experienced. So things that we are hearing, and we have the ability to really look across trends and insights and be able to see that. And as far as leaders, the things that are coming top of mind that they're focusing on and that are going to be competencies for tomorrow's leaders are around the topics of empathy, being able to be real, transparent, be able to say, I don't have the answers, but we'll work on this together and we'll collaborate together. Having a sense, I know we're going to talk about self-care, having a sense of understanding and empathy towards people we work with, that they're experiencing all different kinds of things, whether that's with them personally, professionally, dealing with people at home, illness, safety, injustice. We are experiencing all of those, and leaders are actually saying, I feel bad sometimes delegating things to other people because I know their plates are already full and they have so much that they're facing and those challenges. Another is resilience. So being able to bounce back, if you think about it like the rubber band, being able to flex to a situation and then also to be able to bounce back when something kind of knocks you down, and the ability to capitalize on positive moments, provide that recognition that allows us to be able to reward personally and professionally people who have the ability to really step up as a leader in these times. And the other is agility, being able to, again, going to that mindset around flexibility, being able to be agile, changing on a dime, being able to see a situation and having to react very quickly and adjusting to that in a positive way.
Great. Also, speaking of that, how is the future of education going to be driven by student insights?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think we're in a unique position, at Washington University in the HRM program because we are able to really pull from the insights. We're providing as much education and they're providing as much education to us as we hopefully are providing to them. We learn a lot. We honor the transparency in the classroom. We encourage dialogue about current events. We encourage dialogues about what are going on within their organizations and what are they hearing and experiencing. Our students are working adults. They are in industries, they are in the field, they are in collateral fields, and it's great to be able to experience and hear directly from them. And we take that information and we use that in our classroom, whether that's through their online learning, their face-to-face learning, whether assignments that they're doing or lectures that we're giving, that we are capitalizing on being able to use what's most important for them.
Great. Thank you so much, Jennifer. I appreciate that. Andrew, so as we begin to kind of wrap up our first part of our panel today, can you give us a glimpse of what life looks like for HR professionals on the other side of this, and especially touch on remote workplaces?
Right. And that's fun for me to think about and talk about, because like many of those who I'm sure are on this call, every day has just been putting out another fire, a raging fire, a dumpster fire, whatever kind of fire you want to call it. It has been blazing of last minute issues that are coming up and how to deal with them as they come up. So it's fun to think about for a minute. Okay, let's take a deep breath, take a step back. And what does all this look like on the other side of this crisis? And really, I see this as a tremendous opportunity for HR professionals to grow within your own organizations and create unprecedented value. And that what we've been dealing with in the past couple months gives us all that opportunity to really bring new things to our organizations that could make us much stronger on the other side of this than we were going into it. I'll give some examples to give you some specifics to this. For those of you who are small businesses, right? Months ago, you had for the first time the FFCRA thrust upon you. That had never happened before, right? We only had the FMLA. That applied to those of you who are 50 and above. The majority of us are small businesses and managing those, and you didn't have to deal with this stuff. You could do whatever you wanted with leave, assuming the state didn't regulate it where you happen to operate. Well, now that you've had a taste of what it looks like to develop a leave program, you have the opportunity to go back to your organizations and say, this is what would work for our culture. This is what's manageable for our employees. And this is how it's going to actually add value to our organizations and give us predictability with respect to when people are here and when they're not. The second example is exactly what Melissa said, which is, with respect to remote work. How many of you have job descriptions that were created 5 years ago that are completely ugly and boilerplate and maybe not really reflecting what it is people are coming in and doing day to day? And somewhere in that job description, some maybe attorney put the language essential functions in big old caps and then 10 million bullet points underneath. And under one of those essential functions, it says it's essential that you be here in person performing the work. Remote work is not available. Maybe you've gone back and looked at those job descriptions to say, well, wait a minute, we've said this is essential and that there's no way under any circumstances anyone could do this remotely. And yet here we've been operating for the last few months with this person not sitting in the office environment. Figuring out how we're going to manage people remotely is going to be extremely difficult, right? We have trouble managing people when they're here in person. We have trouble staying on top of them and making sure that they're meeting the expectations that we have to set. Look, if you can come up with the structure of how you're going to manage performance of people remotely, not only are you going to be helping your organization with legal compliance, not only are you going to be helping them add value to the workforce that you have, but look, if you come up with a good enough idea, come talk to me. We'll go sell it to somebody for $1 billion. We have enough trouble managing people's performance in person. If you can find out how to do it well and really create a culture in your organization for workforce management of people outside your workplace, we can really create a better workplace for everybody that's more inclusive, that gives people opportunities that they didn't have before to be parents, to have lives outside of the office in ways that are unprecedented. So this is an opportunity for us to really spring forward with our profession. And I would encourage everyone to really think about how you might do that with the culture of your organization.
Thank you. And in addition to that, can you talk a little bit why the HR professional is going to be the one to lead that transformation?
Yeah, and those of you who are students of mine, I see a few of you in this chat, fully expect you to say hi and you haven't yet. So I'm waiting for that. I'm a little offended. But I'm sure you just, didn't notice I was here yet or something. But we talk about this a lot in my U College class. So I helped U College develop the legal aspects of human resources class for the last 3 years. I'm a practicing employment lawyer advising businesses by trade and a corporate trainer, but we developed a class that really talks about how to enable HR professionals to stand up and make the workplace a better place. It's not just about legal compliance. That's the bare minimum. It's about creating a culture where employees aren't going to want to sue you and they know what the expectations are and you're helping them meet them. And when they're not meeting them, we're taking appropriate action that is fair and just for your workplace. HR, you are the workforce management expert. No one in your organization knows it like you do because you're the workplace therapist. People are coming to you and you're the open door policy, right? You're the one who has to sit there while people, sit on your therapist couch in your HR office and talk about what the culture's like for them and talk about what their concerns are with respect to inclusion, with respect to performance, with respect to management. You are the ones who have the opportunities to really say, okay, I've created a document. It's got 3 ideas in there that we could do that based on what I'm seeing during COVID, could make our workplace better on the other side of COVID. No one else has that kind of perspective. So those of you who've taken my class know I try to enable you to leave each module that we do with action items that you can take back to your organization. Do that. Think about how you might do that as a result of COVID. If you sign up my class, we'll probably do a module on that next semester. I did not know until Heather mentioned it that you could just sign up for classes piecemeal. That's awesome. Feel free to contact me about mine if you have questions about it. But it's a great question, Melissa, because it's something we talk about and engage about every week.
Great. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, panelists. This has been a really great panel full of wonderful wisdom. I'm going to now open the lines up for questionings from our attendees. Vanessa, do we have any questions?
Yes, we do. We have 3 questions. The first one comes from Sandra Sledge, and it is, what suggestions do you have for leaders to develop competencies vital for the future? For example, empathy, transparency, and when this was not previously in their skill set.
So Jennifer, you talked about competencies. Why don't you take this one?
Sure. Yeah, happy to. I see it as like a 3-legged stool. So I think one has to be around the culture. So how is the culture identifying with those terms? So what are those definitions, and how do we look at empathy at our organization, or humility or agility? So I think that's a definition. And with that, role models. So leaders are serving as role models of those behaviors and building it into the culture. Another piece is skill building. So be able to access different micro learnings or curriculums that would help build those skills so they have a baseline of that information, and then being able to take it back into the workplace. And the third, I would be remiss as an executive coach if I didn't say coaching and mentoring is important. Being able to take it down to the individual and be able to focus on clear action steps and clear decisions that each individual leader has to make in order to progress in their skills with all of those.
Thank you, Jennifer. Does anybody else have anything they want to add on that piece? Okay, do we have another question, Vanessa?
Yes, we do. This one comes from an anonymous attendee. What advice do you give to employees for supporting their Black colleagues?
Ooh. Anybody want to take that one?
Sure, I'll be happy to take a stab at it and listen to my fellow panelists as well. You know, I think that the key word in that question is listen. I think that the key word in that whole effort is seeking to understand. And I think we have to be in a position to where people are open and free to ask questions on things they don't know about. And I think just as important is for the person receiving that question to take it in the light that is delivered, which is seeking to understand. So I think it's really getting to a place where we aren't afraid to ask questions that we don't know the answers to, and being in an environment where those questions are appreciated and valued. That gets to the culture that Rhonda talked about earlier. We have to create that kind of environment.
Anyone have anything to add?
Yeah, I would definitely ditto what Reggie just said. And I think in terms of how we're having these very difficult conversations now, you know, in the workplace, only listening, and by listening, I don't mean on sort of the superficial listening. I mean deep, emphatic listening. But I think more importantly, one of the things that many of us probably realize, if you think about it, within the context of our work and our personal relationships, when we start talking about having friends and colleagues of a diverse background, to the extent that you actually take the time to get to know that person, to spend time with that person, I think that one of the things that we're seeing is that people who might have sat right next to each other every day really now are feeling a sense of like, I don't really know this, like I was disconnected. And I think in order to foster those kind of connections, you have to make a deliberate effort to do it. It's not going to happen simply because you come to work every day and happen to run into each other in the break room. You have to make sure that it is top of mind to know, hey, this person maybe working in an environment where they're the only person that looks like them. They're the only person, particularly of their gender, and to have the empathy to understand or to try to imagine what that might be like. And so that gets into the other notion of those diversity and inclusion policies and some other things. But I think just on an everyday level, people, I hope now we have a heightened consciousness about differences and how to go about understanding those differences and respecting those differences and what value they bring to the workplace. So, you know, if any of my colleagues are listening, as a Black person, you can send me some food, and I like food. Just feed me. I'll feel better.
Wonderful. Anything else before we move on to the next question?
I just echo what Rhonda said. Empathy is so important. You know, being able to really have an intentional perspective and try to connect and try to feel what someone else is feeling and relate in that way, and just be more intentional around your mindset.
And authentic.
Authentic, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I'll add is for many of you on the call, many of you I know who I see, you're in small businesses, you're HR departments of 1 or maybe 2. Some of you aren't, of course. I see so many cool innovations coming out with respect to D&I from large businesses and the executives who they often employ to drive that internal change. And remember, like, something unique happened in 1964. Congress put on us as HR professionals the obligation to drive change, not just in our workplace, but in our society, in passing Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. That put a job on us, right? That is a key part of our profession. And, you know, I love seeing the things coming out of big businesses. I don't know what's happening at small businesses, and they employ 60 million people in our country. 47% of the U.S. workforce works at a business with fewer than 500 employees. For those of you who are in that category, think about what can you do to formalize a D&I and inclusion plan for your workplace that's going to institutionalize the kind of empathy Rhonda, Jennifer, and Reggie all talked about, that's going to institutionalize that sort of listening that they're going to talk about. Not only does that kind of thing help with day-to-day operations, from the legal side of things, right? I love that. I love those open door policies. I love those programs that give employees the opportunity to talk to you about how they're feeling in the workplace in an open way, because I truly do believe that having those candid conversations often dispels any confusion, takes things that maybe aren't on the right track and can put them back on the right one in a way that actually lessens your potential liability later on. This isn't just stuff that we need to do for the good of society. This is stuff as an HR professional we have an obligation to do based on a law that was passed over 50 years ago that we're still working on implementing. So those of you in small businesses, take this to heart. Think about, okay, what am I seeing the big fish do? And what's going to work for us? What can I bring here that is going to create that institutionalized way of creating diversity and inclusion in our environment when you're not going to have a CHRO of diversity and inclusion who's doing that? So I think, again, this is an opportunity for us as HR to take on something that adds value and creates more value from our position and brings more value to the work that we do in our environments.
Thank you, Andrew. Vanessa, it looks like the questions are coming in.
Yes, we are hopping with questions. So next from Herbie, the question is, what would you say are some next practices for addressing the mental well-being of our employees as we move past this pandemic?
Reggie, do you want to take that one since you talked a little bit about self-care?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I think we've talked about it a little bit as well, just in terms of creating mediums and mechanisms for listening. You know, first and foremost, getting folks to feel comfortable in their environment, safe in their environment, where they can share those thoughts. It's, you know, one of the things we're doing now across BJC is having listening sessions where folks can come and share their perspectives, not only about how they feel in the workplace, but how they feel outside of the workplace. So creating that safe environment, if it's not already there, where folks are open and willing to talk and willing to listen to others talk and share ideas and thoughts about how they feel. I think that's critical.
Jennifer, from a psychologist and coaching standpoint, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'll agree with Reggie. We call that psychological safety. So there's a safe place where someone can feel that they can open up about challenges that they're experiencing, whether that's through an EAP program or whether that's just having a buddy or someone that they can talk to, that they can share those challenges with. And, we're all bogged down with so many things right now, and so much mental capacity is being spent on just how to deal with these challenges, knowing that you have to focus on self-care, but not knowing how to do it, and being able to provide those resources as HR professionals to help and direct and kind of align. Oftentimes people come to someone like a coach or therapist kind of wanting to talk it out, but sometimes they also want direction. They don't know what to do. And so we need to be able to have some things in place that we can immediately direct them to, so that they can get some fast remedy or relief.
Great, thank you. Vanessa, do you have another question for us?
Yes, I do. This comes from Vito. With the focus on data analysis and human resources, what is the best way for HR professionals to upskill to manage data, as well as work with IT to collaborate and communicate effectively?
Okay, open floor. Who wants it?
So I can give some input, and I'm not an HRIS or IT expert, and it is overwhelming to me how often I see the new offerings coming out from the various companies that are offering different programs and different new things and trying to court your business from one to the other. I will say that those companies love getting to know you. They love talking to you. They love getting in front of you. And all of them, as far as I can tell, from ADP to Ascentus to all these other organizations that are creating the HRIS and data analytics workforce management software, they are all very frequently putting on webinars to educate you about their software because they want you to buy it. I've had the pleasure of speaking on some of those webinars about various legal topics for those organizations over the past 6 months, and how it ties in with the work that they do and that they help you with. So I would highly encourage anybody on this, connect with the other people on this call, look at what the organizations are who are doing these things, and get on those webinars. It is amazing to learn about the things that they're doing. In fact, at SHRM of Greater St. Louis, a presentation that we plan on doing probably in the next 3 to 4 months is to get all those folks in a room from those business partners, ADP, Ascentus, you know them, who they are, Insperity, of course, too, to sit down and say, hey, this is our software and this is some cool stuff you should know about it. In the mid-COVID, they've done some really interesting things, like incorporating temperature testing into the time clock systems that employees are using day-to-day to clock in. There's been some really neat innovations out there. But Vito, I empathize with your question because it is impossible to keep up with all of them. So a really good question, but trust me, if you follow them on LinkedIn, they will be happy to tell you and educate you about what they have out there.
Thank you, Andrew.
And I'd like to add one other thing. I think it's critical, and as HR business partners, which is my function, we have to understand our business. So definitely understanding what's out in the market, but more so understanding what are the needs of our customers, what are the needs of our leaders. If we're going to be true trusted advisors, we have to be able to speak their language. We have to know what's on their mind, what keeps them up at night, and we have to be proactive about solving those things. So in a lot of ways, from my perspective, that guides where you need to go, what you need to learn, and things that you need to add to your toolkit to make you a more effective partner for your customers.
Great. Vanessa.
Excellent. Yes, we continue to get really great questions from our attendees. The next one comes from Jason Hartsfield. I really appreciate the discussion about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I would like to know what HR professionals should keep in mind with regards to multi-generational workforce, especially when we now have 5 generations in the workforce at the same time.
and they are all very, very different. Who wants to tackle that one?
I'll be happy to jump in.
Thank you.
You know, I am ecstatic by the fact that they are so very different, because it lends itself to understanding that even those within the same generation aren't necessarily the same as well. Sure, certainly there are similarities, but I think it's critical for us as companies and leaders in the HR space to focus on that individual, learning that individual, and really being a conduit to that individual having a voice in their organizations. I think we oftentimes generalize and categorize folks. My friends tease me all the time because I'm a baby boomer with some respects with a Generation X mindset. We have to use that as a guide, but we still have to get to know the individual and really speak to that individual. I think that's critical.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. It's not a label. You know, it's rather, it's good to help frame up what context someone might be coming from. It's great to have those differences in the workplace, but it shouldn't be a label, and we shouldn't try to create the same person. So we're not robots, you know, we're individuals that come from all different walks of life and all different generations, and being able to embrace that, own that, and then also just, again, try not to get people to always act the same. So just because a millennial looks at something in one way and a baby boomer looks at something another way, they don't have to look at it the same way. They're going to always continue to look at it from their context, but then helping to understand, again, kind of going back to empathy about where they're coming from and what they might be thinking.
Thank you.
All right, next question. This comes from an anonymous attendee. Any advice on how to combat compassion fatigue?
Oh, Rhonda, take that one?
Yeah, I'll take that just because I've suffered from it. Prior to coming to Insperity, I worked in the nonprofit sector and still work very closely with nonprofits, and so that was, you know, a term we heard often as it relates to people becoming involved in the missions of organizations, but also internally with employees who were working at agencies and, you know, with very noble and compelling missions, but the work was daunting and hard. And so trying to support employees in those kind of environments was, you know, even more challenging sometimes, because you have your employees and then you also have clients that you're trying to serve. Compassion fatigue, you know, to Reggie's point, I think all of this has to be about understanding from a very personal standpoint how you take care of yourself and what support looks like for you, because you can't give from an empty well. And so there are those who, while they are well-meaning and well-intentioned, they keep outwardly giving and wanting to help others and support others. And once again, that's great. But if you haven't filled yourself up so that you then have sort of the overflow to be able to do that for people, going to burn out, and then you're no good to anybody. And as a nonprofit leader, I learned that the hard way. So this is speaking from experience. I did not learn this and watching you in class or in a book. I messed up miserably in trying to just give of myself and trying to, you know, support the staff and support clients and make sure that the agencies was meeting its targets and goals. And it took a toll on me. And one of the things I realized, I would have a sign in my office. I encourage all HR professionals, put a sign up. You know, the whole analogy of put your mask on first on the airplane, is that notion. Give yourself to yourself before you give yourself away, and you will have more to give.
Great. Thank you for that.
Excellent. All right. So just a little note, we want to be mindful of time, and we still have 9 questions. I'm so excited about the engagement. And so we'll want to keep our answers brief so that we can get, you know, to everyone's question. There's some really good questions. The next one is from Michelle Harper. What advice can we give to professionals and our employees who are behind in their workload because of caring for kids during the day or while on the clock?
Andrew, do you want to take a stab at that one, since you talked a little bit about working from home and the new normal might be?
Right. When I talk about counseling employees in any sort of situation, I usually say we have to do three things. Number one, set the expectation generally for our workforce and what it's going to be across the board. Number two, convey that expectation extremely clearly to everybody. And then number three, for those who aren't meeting it, of course, follow up with them about why and what we can do to enable them to meet that expectation. And if they can't, then we proceed down another path, right? And I think that in this new environment, we need to get back to step one, right? Conveying that expectation of what exactly we expect as far as the work that's going to get done, and making sure that's clear to everybody, and then following up with the people who aren't and having those one-on-one conversations about how can we enable you to meet those expectations in our new work environment. You know, I love flexibility in the workplace. I am all about it. I take advantage of it to an extreme, as people who work with me know, as my students know, who will see posts from me at weird hours because I'm maybe on a vacation while making sure that I'm keeping that class going, right? So, you know, I think we need to embrace that as best we can, especially those of you in smaller organizations. You have that opportunity and flexibility right now to ask employees, how can I enable you to succeed? Think about it like the accommodation discussions that you have on a day-to-day basis because of employees who have disabilities, who need those kinds of modifications for their jobs. To what extent can we do those for other employees, particularly parents at home? I've been thinking about them a lot, in a way that is going to add value to your organization, but make it clear to them, this is where the line is. This is what the expectation is. We're making it as tangible and as objective as possible to give you the every opportunity to meet it, so that we don't have to take some other sort of action if you aren't going to meet those expectations. I would love if, when I'm looking through emails and litigation, I saw more emails like that, that really it helped enable employees to succeed while recognizing that they might not be in some instances, in case it becomes a problem later on. So hopefully you feel enabled to go have those conversations after we all talk today.
Thank you, Andrew. Vanessa.
All right. I think that we, in some ways, covered this next question, but I will ask it. It comes from Katie. She says, one of the concerns that she hears from white leaders is a fear of owning or acknowledging racial bias due to HR concerns. She believes that HR professionals need to be able to move past that. And can someone on the panel talk openly about how to discuss implicit bias within the organization and not increase legal risk to the organization or create a legal issue?
Great question. Anybody want to tackle that one?
This might come to me as well to start the discussion on it. But, you know, any discussion in the workplace or act in the workplace can create legal risk. There's not necessarily going to be more or less. And I do see situations where businesses try to do good things and it goes in a direction that they don't expect, and they end up having to face a situation that they have to deal with. I would say, general proposition in most situations, don't be afraid. I'm saying very often to clients that what matters to be a good HR professional is compassion, confidence, and candor. I don't worry about you having candid, compassionate conversations about race in the workplace. I would like it. I tend to think jurors and judges are gonna understand that you're trying to do good things for your workplace, and sometimes they might spin out of control. The workplace is the only place in the world where people from all different backgrounds are forced to come together and be together, right? Whether they want to or not. So there's going to be clashes of all different types. And I would say, again, as a general matter, we want to embrace that, and we want to take that head on and do what we can to facilitate those conversations to make the workplace a better place. So I would say, as a general proposition, probably don't need to worry too much about the fact that you're facilitating those conversations with respect to creating legal risk, or certainly not more than you face any other day when people open their mouths in the workplace.
Thank you, Andrew. Vanessa, do we have another question?
Yes, we do. It is, let me see, I'm wanting to make sure that I'm following the questions. Okay, I think this is really good. And remember, the goal of this panel is that it's in St. Louis for St. Louis. Can the panelists speak to specific examples of failed attempts that have involved trial and error and something that you've worked on during this time of pandemic and being able to move your company forward? So anybody brave enough to share something they tried in response to the pandemic or protests or even the recession that didn't work out?
Wow, these guys are not letting you guys off the hook easy. Jennifer, do you have something?
No, I was just reflecting a little bit. That's an interesting question.
Yeah.
So I can certainly share something. I don't know that I consider it a failure as much as there was opposing viewpoints to our action. And certainly we embraced that. We actually listened to and heard the concerns, but we actually had a white coach for Black Lives Matter event at our hospital, and there was some, prior to the event, there was some pretty I guess stern objection to the event. And I was pleased to say that our president spoke to the individual, addressed it, you know, just in terms of our motivation for doing it and the intent. And not sure if that moved that person, but it was really kind of our stand. And, you know, also going back to the previous question, one of the things that we try to stay focused on, and it's an acronym because we're in healthcare, MRI, which is most respectful intent. And that's what we guide all of our actions around, making sure that we're not deliberately intending to do anything negative to anyone, but deliberately intending to open up more avenues of dialogue. And so the event that we had was well attended, and we felt good about it. And ultimately, we then had subsequent conversations with people after the event. So I wouldn't call it a failure, but it was definitely some reaction that we weren't expecting.
Thank you, Reggie. Well, Vanessa, I think we're getting to probably one of our last questions at this point.
Yes, we'll take this last question, and certainly there'll be opportunities for more engagement with the panelists and their respective organizations, and then of course in their follow-up comments on how to connect with them. But I think that this question is really good. With everything going on in the world, protests, working from home, returning to work, school openings, etc., and the threat of COVID continuing to grow and potentially infect others throughout next year, what recommendations do you have regarding employee engagement and morale? We are seeing that there's a lot of fear and frustration that our company does not have answers about the future.
Rhonda, do you want to talk about that, or Jennifer?
Sure. I'll start by saying, first of all, we, you know, at Insperity, we have a team of service HR professionals that are specialists and experts in their respective areas and have supported our clients as they try to navigate this. And, you know, I would say that making sure in terms of, you know, speaking to, you know, what people are going through, communication is just key. Now more than ever, with everybody working remotely, and I know we say that and we have a tendency to think we know that what communication means, but I think understanding what we've talked about already, which communications is more than just shooting out emails, you know, conveying information, but it's really about having dialogues and listening. And in terms of engagement, it has to be a little more personalized now. Everybody's working in their respective home environments, or sometimes some people are going back to the office. Having an understanding of what each person needs to be successful, so that you can kind of customize a little more around making sure people are engaged. I think having the conversations via Zoom is certainly helpful, but you know, maybe some of you are suffering from post-traumatic Zoom syndrome like I am, and you need to find other ways to reconnect with your coworkers and your team members that are outside of Zoom. And that might be individual conversations in different ways. But I would say engagement is really incredibly critical now, because it's so easy to get isolated, even if you're in a house full of people, but isolated within your own home and challenges that you're having there. And if you don't have a way to express that and talk to other people, it can become very daunting.
Yeah. Jennifer, do you have any thoughts about, as a coach, coaching back into that?
Yeah, I'll just add a couple of thoughts. One is just be authentic with it. You know, make sure that it has true intention and that it's meaningful. You know, so don't do it just to do it because everyone else is doing it, but do it because you really truly want to invest in the well-being of your people. And also is to piggyback on Rhonda's point, is to make it personal. What's going to motivate and engage one person is very different than what's going to motivate and engage another person. And so each leader, each person should be looking at each individual and seeing what would inspire, motivate, and encourage that individual in a different way. And, you know, just really continue to listen and be compassionate, have flexibility, have agility, and be able to utilize that as another tool within your toolbox.
Great. Thank you guys so much. And just want to say again, thank you for everyone who came and participated on the call today. Appreciate all of the wonderful wisdom that was shared here. It was a great conversation. And I hope that we can answer some more questions in our follow-up letter that's coming, along with some resources that all of the panelists put together for you. Heather, I'm going to turn it back over to you to close us out.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of the panelists for doing a fantastic job. As we close today, I hope that you heard something that affirmed the importance of your role as a change agent and a culture setter, not just in your company, but in our region. This afternoon, later this afternoon, you will receive a follow-up email from us with a list of resources from our panelist organization, as well as information about our Human Resources Management program. If you're considering continuing your education, we'd love to have you join us at U College. I mentioned earlier that there's the opportunity to take a single course, and that is true. There are caveats about graduate classes and undergraduate classes and where you fit in. And I would just say quickly that we are a very student by student, person by person place. So feel free to enroll or connect with us or check out our website. And what probably will happen is that somebody will contact you individually to get you set up. So hope to hear from you. And again, thank you so much for coming. Hope you have a great day. Bye.
Be safe, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining.
Bye.
Thank you for joining.